Chapter 12 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 12. The Night of the Full Moon. "It seems too good to be true that it should end like this," said Monty. She said it on the roof of Mina House, in the kiosk room made of mushrbiyeh work, which I had engaged for a little private dinner party that night. You see, it was the night of the full moon, the magic night of the Sphinx spell, which must not be wasted, no matter how tired you may be or how many excitements you may have lived through. Anthony and I had had our explanations. He had told me that one night in a café, where he was spreading news of his dream, he heard two men talking in low voices about the House of the Crocodile. The word hashish had not been mentioned, but Anthony had imbibed a vague impression of something secret, and had wondered and had been interested. Then the matter had slipped his mind, but, summoned in the night from the writing of letters to advise Mrs. Jones, he had recalled Monty's wish to visit a hashish den. He knew of none, but suspected the existence of one or two. How to find out in a hurry? He had asked himself. And with that, the remembrance of those few whispered words in the café had come echoing back to him. He acted upon the suggestion, went to the door of the swinging crocodile, knocked, and knocked again, had the door opened to him as if in surprise by an apparently sleepy man. Announced the motive of his coming as if it were a foregone conclusion that hashish could be smoked in the house by the initiated. His disguise was not suspected. It never was when he played the Egyptian, and when they asked who had sent him, he had the inspiration to utter the name of that Bey who had been Mansoor's master. This gave him entrance. He was taken upstairs, passed through the door forbidden to the public, and the first person he saw in the long room as he entered was Bedr smoking a goza, one of those cocoanut, cane-stemmed pipes in which hashish is mingled with the Persian tobacco called tumbak. Bedr was accused of treachery, and defended himself. The ladies had insisted. It was his place to obey. He had done no wrong in engaging a carriage to wait outside the Gezireh Palace gardens, and bringing his employers to the best place in Cairo for the hashish smoking. The ladies were safe and happy, in a private room where they had tried their little experiment, and now they were sleeping. As soon as they waked and felt like going home, he was ready to take them. It was for Miss Gilder, not for Bedr, to beg pardon of her friends if they were frightened. And all the time it had seemed to Anthony that the man was expecting some one to arrive. He watched the doorway half eagerly, half anxiously, when a servant came or went. He started, and betrayed emotion which might have been disappointment or relief. But when Anthony questioned him, he said, "I expect no one, Effendi. It is only that I shall not be easy till we get the ladies home, now you tell me their people are alarmed." Just then, and before Anthony saw the girls, a servant had come running in to say that there was an alarm. Something had happened in the street, and the police were there. Mansoor feared that it was a ruse, and that the house was being watched, back and front. Where the forbidden thing is, no precaution can be too great. For their own sakes, and Mansoor's sake, no one must go out, perhaps not until the next night. But luckily a saint's day would give peace for the morrow, and all doors could be shut without causing remark. The news that there was no escape for many hours to come distressed no one apparently, except Antoun. He had gone to the door, and had tried to open it, but found that already it was locked on the other side. Then he knew that it was useless to struggle, for he was unarmed, the door was thick, and no one outside could hear if he shouted. He must use his wits, but first he must make sure that the two girls were safe. He forced, rather than induced, Bedr to show him the room they had engaged, a small one, closed only with a portière, and looking over the court, down into the open-fronted recess where Mansoor's family life went on, like a watchdog's in his kennel. It was true, as Bedr had said, the girls slept on a cushioned mattress, wrapped in black haberas, their faces turned to the wall. As they could not be taken out, Anthony did not wake them, but let them get, in peace, their money's worth of dreaming. His next thought was to try and bribe the Arab attendant to smuggle out a letter, but acceptable as a bribe would have been, the man explained his helplessness to earn it, at least for the time being. He could do nothing till one of his fellow servants came up from below, to pass food for the imprisoned smokers through a hole in the door, made purposely in case of just such an emergency. Probably no one would appear till morning, for who would be hungry before then? Even with the morning, it might be Mansoor himself who would bring the food, and inquire again at the door if all were well within. But if the noble Hadji wrote the letter, it should be sent when opportunity arose. One of the servants below stairs, said the man, was his father, who might during the next day be able to slip out as if on some errand. Then he would perhaps take a letter, if he could be sure of good pay, and that he would not be delivered up to the police. So Anthony had written on a sheet torn from his notebook, and had made an envelope of another sheet. The address of the Ghezireh Palace had helped the man to believe that no evil would reach his father, and a sweetener in the shape of all Anthony's ready money had done the rest. But evidently the old man had not succeeded in finding an excuse for an errand until after the noon hour, and meanwhile time had seemed long in the house of the crocodile. When the girls waked, wanting to go home, they were ill. They found the game not worth the candle, but Anthony's presence had given them comfort. They were humble and remorseful, and Bedr was so conspicuously a worm that Monny consented to his discharge. "It would take more time than we've got to make him worth converting," she said to Rachel when the Armenian had carefully laid all the blame of the expedition upon her shoulders. Never were two runaway children more glad to be found and restored to their anxious relatives than Monny Gilder and Rachel Guest. As for Bedr, he took his dismissal with a week's wages submissively, but the gravest question concerning him still lacked an answer. Had he merely been officious and indiscreet in guiding the girls secretly to the house of the crocodile, and there procuring hasheesh to buy them dreams, or had he wanted something to happen in that house which had not happened? A certain amount of browbeating from Antoun and bullying from me dragged nothing out of him. And perhaps there was nothing to be dragged. Perhaps it was through oversensitiveness that Brigit and I dwelt suspiciously upon Bedr's motives, and asked each other who it was that he had expected at the house of the crocodile. Even Anthony did not accuse the Armenian of anything worse than slyness and cowardice, according to him the two worst vices of a man, but he volunteered to find out what mysterious night disturbance in the street had caused the sudden closing of the doors. It was Biddy's thought that the person Bedr wished to meet might fortunately have been prevented by this very disturbance from keeping his appointment, and Monny saved a serious ending to her adventure. It began to seem rather a worry, travelling with so important a young woman as Miss Gilder, and a vague dread of the future hung over me as it hung over Brigit, who loved the girl. We felt, dimly, as if we had a warning, and did not yet know how to profit by it. The atmosphere was charged with electricity, as before an earthquake, and we felt that the affair of the hasheesh den might be but a preface to some chapter yet unwritten. Still, it was impossible not to forgive Monny her indiscretion. Indeed, she became so honey-sweet and childlike in her desire to make up for what we had suffered, that the difficulty was not to like her better. She besought us to forget the episode. If we only knew how sick she and Rachel had been, we'd see why they never wanted to think of those hours again. And when I chanced to mention that tonight would be full moon, the night of the nights when the Sphinx and the Giza pyramids held their court, Monny begged to have the bad taste of her naughtiness taken out of her mouth by a dinner at Mena House. We might dine early, and plunge into the desert later when the moon was high. Of course I proposed that all should be my guests, all except Antoun, who, though recognized as a gentleman of Egypt, was considered by Miss Gilder an alien, not exactly on dining terms. He was supposed to go home, to his own address. At 8:30 he was to take a taxi to Mena House, where he would arrive before 9, in time to help me organize my expedition. I explained to Monny that, though we should dine privately, it would be my duty to see that the Candace people paid their respects to the Sphinx, and gazed upon her as she ate moon honey. If they missed this sight, or if anything went wrong with their way of seeing it, I should never be forgiven. But the much chastened Monny graciously did not mind. She thought it would be fun to watch the sheep-dog rounding up his flock. Useless to explain to her the subtle social distinction between a flock and a set, both with capitals. To her the blaze of the set's smartness was but the flicker of a penny dip. We could drive the crowd on ahead, and look at our moon when they were out of its light. So there's the explanation of Monny's presence in the mushrbiyeh kiosk on the roof of Mena House, on the night following the great adventure which would have put most girls to bed with nervous prostration.